So welcome everyone. This is our 13th session of Food for Thought, and we're honored to have Professor Joann Baney with us today. She's going to be discussing communicating in conflict and crisis. As usual, if you have any questions, please keep them to the end of the session. We'll open up for Q&A. And if you can raise your hand by clicking on the participants icon on the bottom left, or you could put your question in the chat. And now I'll hand it off to Bill for the introduction. Thank you, everyone.
So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Many of you are repeat offenders, which is great. We really didn't know how this would go when we started it early on in the pandemic, and it's become a real great regular feature. So we're going to keep it going for as long as we possibly can, which hopefully will be forever. So today we're particularly honored with Joann Baney, who I've known for many years, who is, I always get this wrong because she wins another award from the last time I memorized it. I believe she's won six.
My class has won 5 and I've won 1.
Well, that's a technicality. Best teaching award 6 times. So that's like unbelievable. So she's a great teacher. She specializes in communication and communication in the context of leadership and organizations. She has written a book on the subject. She, among other things, not only teaches her class 3 times because of the demand here at CEPA, but she has also done a vast array of executive training sessions for companies and countries and organizations, nonprofit and governmental around the globe, including here in New York for the award-winning, Harvard award-winning program for the FDNY for the Fire and EMS of New York City. And she's taught in Republic of Georgia and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and China and just about every place, Brazil, maybe not Brazil. I'm wrong on Brazil, I think.
Not yet.
We have a plan to get her to Brazil. So she's just terrific, and she's one of the nicest people you could ever meet and a great mentor if you're looking for one. And we're very grateful. So Joann, please take it away.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Bill and Jeremy, and I want to say thank you to all of you. I recognize a lot of faces and I recognize a lot of names. You haven't turned on your camera up, but I recognize your name for many of you, and so it's a pleasure for me to see you all. And thanks for making the time to come and be with us this afternoon. So I sent out a paper about leadership communication, and those of you who've been in my class are going to know that many of the things that I wanted to talk about today will resonate with you because they're things that we've spoken about in class. And so look ahead to make connections to the things that we've spoken about, and I certainly hope that you'll have some questions as I finish with my overview. I'm going to talk for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, not very long, just recap the reading, and then I'm happy to take any questions or expand on anything that may be on your mind if it relates to what we've spoken about or relates to the situation that we are in with communication in general, because it certainly has changed a lot over the past 6 months. So the area that I talked about were, the theme of what I wrote about was the horseshoe nails of leadership, the horseshoe nails of communication. And the idea with that being that many of the fundamental or foundational elements of good communication are ones that are dismissed or often forgotten. Because they're so foundational and they're so fundamental, we don't necessarily give them their due in terms of their importance. And so I wanted to go through what some of those elements are, and in particular in the skills of listening, questioning, and how they may combine into the skills of influencing. The idea with leadership is, a lot of my colleagues at the business school do many sessions on leadership. I also teach in executive education at the business school. They do a lot of sessions on leadership, and their sessions are often about what happens when an organization has a great leader, or what happens when there's a great leader in a public office, what happens when there's an ineffective leader and how bad that is and how things can really go south. But what I like to talk about is well, what exactly goes into being an effective leader? What are the nuts and bolts of it? What are the skills? What actually do you have to do? And that's what this session is about. The idea is that we're going to go through some of the fundamental skills of listening and questioning, and then how they combine into influencing. So for listening is the communication skill that's taught the least. It's the one that's used the most, and it's the one that actually has been really challenged and affected by our situation on Zoom. Why is listening so critical? Because listening is the communication skill that builds relationships. It's the one that we depend on for relationship building. Now, what we know about technology is that technology has actually invaded our space for building our empathetic muscles. And empathy is built and developed and increased by interacting with people and by paying attention to nonverbal and vocal cues and little things that may relate to what their feelings are behind something, what their perspectives are, but they're easy to lose unless we're really attentive. And technology gets in the way of that. It gets in the way because a lot of interaction is built off powering through moments of awkwardness. That's how we build empathy, is we power through moments of awkwardness. So in other words, we have to experience a little bit interpersonal tension or awkwardness, and then creatively figure out how we're going to get out of it. And that's how we build empathy, because we start to take a stab at what we think the other person is thinking or feeling. And in doing so, we learn how to read the cues of the other cues the cues that other people send, whether they're nonverbal or vocal. So we build our empathy through moments of interpersonal awkwardness, and then we take a stab at what somebody might be feeling by making a statement or a declaration, and take a guess at it, and then we start to build empathy. And technology gets in the way of this because, as you know, when we are with others, we often dive down into our phones to look away when we feel awkward, right? When there's a moment of awkwardness, then we kind of skirt past that by looking down at our phones. And so we're robbing ourselves really of the chance to build empathy. And that empathy is what is going to help us to connect with others. When we connect with others, then we can begin to influence others. Without empathy, you may gain compliance by forcing others, but you won't gain real cooperation until you understand others, and we understand others through empathy and listening. So why is listening so powerful? Listening is powerful because it gives you a chance to reflect on things that you might not otherwise think about. It gives you a chance to learn what somebody else's perspective is. Somebody else may have a perspective that is very different from yours, and unless you're willing to listen to why they're, what their reasons are, you won't know why on earth they may have such a different view. It also is a way of building personal credibility. We build personal credibility by being effective listeners. Why is that? Because most people really like to be listened to. And so when we listen to somebody, we are demonstrating our respect and interest in them, and that builds our personal credibility. That's one of the things that we really want from leaders, and what we really want in moments of crisis as well, is that we want to know that the other person is listening to us. In terms of how our listening helps others, sometimes just listening is a helpful thing to do. People are feeling maybe distraught, maybe they're feeling in a moment of crisis, and our willingness to listen to them may really help them out of that jam. Just by listening, we don't have to necessarily have a solution for them, but just by listening, we can do that. It is a respectful thing to do, and I think we all know that it is the way that we demonstrate respect. We were all taught that as a child, probably, that listening is a respectful thing to do. It shows somebody that you value their perspective, and also can help you understand somebody else's perspective. Then from a relationship point of view, listening has great value because it really is the relationship building skill. If you want to have a better relationship with somebody, I promise it will be better if you listen to them. That is how we do it. We build a relationship by listening. It allows us to bridge differences and bridge divides when we listen. And then finally, one of the magic elements of listening is that it reduces interpersonal tension. I do a lot of work with the New York City Police Department, and one of the things that comes up time and again, one of my students not too long ago was the head of the hostage negotiation team. And what he said is that when you are, in that moment of, managing a situation where somebody else's life is on the line and you're looking to reduce interpersonal tension with somebody who's making unreasonable demands, that one of the great ways to do that is just by listening to them. So it's an incredibly valuable tool. They put it into the packet of, they call it verbal judo, understanding how you can, use somebody's interests with them and to persuade them. So it reduces interpersonal tension. So it's a big skill for managing conflicts, for managing in a negotiation, and again, all the other things I talked about. Your build your credibility, helps you understand others, build relationship, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the nuts and bolts of listening? First, as I wrote about, is the nonverbal look of listening. Now, the nonverbal look of listening is, we all know what it looks like, and yet oftentimes we don't engage in it. Squaring off and facing the other person, making eye contact, and maybe leaning in and indicating that we have interest. Now that we're on a virtual platform, of course, it's very difficult to affect that in the same way, but I want to encourage you to be intentional with your listening patterns as much as you possibly can, because when we are a listener, the only thing the other person has to go on is our nonverbals. They can't read our mind, and presumably we're not saying anything, so they have to decide whether or not we're listening based on our nonverbals. And so let me encourage you to be attentive to that. One of the twists with listening, with interacting via this platform, is eye contact. Eye contact is a really powerful nonverbal. It's one of the biggest nonverbals for demonstrating that you are honest, credible, and forthright as a speaker. It's one of the big nonverbals to indicate that we're listening as well. Making eye contact, I'm talking about in real life, making eye contact is a big indicator. But that all the eye contact is upended by this virtual platform. So right now, I'm looking at my green dot next to my camera, and it probably looks like I'm looking at you or something close to that. And that probably feels good. People like when, speakers make eye contact. And so that probably feels good. But I'll tell you, I can't see any of you. You're down here on my screen. I can't see you. As a listener, one of the ways that we learn about what somebody else is feeling or thinking is through their nonverbal cues. And the only way that you can see those is by looking at them on the screen. So right now, I'm looking at some of you on the screen, and it probably looks like I'm looking away. And so there's sadly a very big challenge with making eye contact work on a virtual platform. But I would say that pay attention to it, and just whatever you're doing, just stick with it so that there is an understanding that you are looking to make eye contact. The second part of good listening are I'll call them encouraging skills. And these are the things that we do that indicate to the other person we're with them as we go along. That is going to be nods, maybe smiles, really, these verbal or non-verbal indicators that we're following along. And those again, say to the other person, I get it, I'm with you, I get a sense of what you're feeling when you say that. And they encourage the other person to continue with their comments. And then lastly, and the trickiest of these, is paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is a reflecting skill, and this is when you reflect back to the other person what you heard them say. And that is the subtext of a good paraphrase might be, this is what I heard you say, did I get it right? One of the challenges with paraphrasing is that we all hear things according to what our interest is, what our priorities are, what we value. And so we naturally filter what somebody says through our own perspective. And that's why paraphrasing is so helpful, because paraphrasing lets you check in with the other person, i.e., this is what I heard you say, did I get it right? maybe what I heard you say is so filtered through my own perspective that it doesn't really match up with what you meant to emphasize. And so my paraphrase gives you a chance to clarify what that is. And I may paraphrase something that you say, and you may say, yeah, that's it. Wow, you've really nailed it. You heard me. That would be a great moment of, matching up. Or you may say, no, it's not that really, it's this other thing. Or what really I was focusing on or was bothered by, but it gives you a chance as a speaker to clarify what that is. This is, you can imagine, this is especially powerful in moments of conflict or crisis or tension, because this gives the other person a chance, one, to have the tension diffused because you're listening, and two, to clarify what their beliefs or perspectives are so that they feel heard and they feel understood. And when people feel listened to, when tension is reduced, they feel heard and understood, naturally you have a better platform then for collaboration, for moving towards a solution. And so that's why the skill of listening is so incredibly powerful when we're talking about communicating in a crisis, because it gives you a chance to connect with the other person and understand what their perspective is. So those are the listening skills. And very quickly to follow up with the questioning skills that go along with that. After you've paraphrased what someone has said, then it's really powerful to ask a question. 80% of the questions that we ask over the course of our day are closed questions. They're easy peasy. We don't have to think about them. They're just, they're so normal that if I asked you to ask a question about virtually anything, my bet, I'd go to Vegas on this, my bet is that you would ask a closed question because they're so easy. So closed questions happen without our thinking about them. Closed questions typically are not good relationship building questions, and they aren't broad information gathering questions. They are narrow focused information gathering questions, and they have their place and they have a lot of value, but open questions are the ones that really lay out the red carpet to the other person to say, I really care about your interests. I care about your priorities. Let me lay out the red carpet with a question here that's going to let you say whatever it is you want to say. So a good way for what questions or how questions are typically open questions. What are some of the challenges that we face would be an open question. How do you think we might approach this would be an open question. So what or how questions allow the other person to expand according to their interests and priorities. Some of the ways I catch myself sometime trying to identify how do I ask open questions. And a lot of the questions that I might ask that would fall into the open question category, I begin with statements such as, tell me about, or talk to me about, or I'm wondering about, I'm curious about. Those are open question kind of beginnings that may let the other person, again, share information according to their interests and priorities. So open questions take priority versus closed questions when you're looking to diffuse tension, gather information in a negotiation or in a crisis. So think about open questions, and we can talk more about that as well. And then finally, if we combine these into the skill of influencing, I want to talk quickly about something from a body of interpersonal language, psychological research called NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. Some of you may have heard of neuro-linguistic programming. It is a science that was developed in California in like the 70s and 80s, so it's kind of new agey, but it relates to how language shapes how we think. You know, the language that we choose, in other words, shapes our perspective and shapes what we think about it. And I won't go into all the details about it, but I do want to talk about one of the skills that comes from NLP, and it's called pace, 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 lead. That's the little moniker that I'm going to give it for right now. Pace, 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 lead. And pacing, for the purposes of influencing, pacing is when you either do something or say something that looks to create a connection or a point of agreement with another person. So it could be a practice or a custom that you're involved in. Maybe there's an expectation that everybody behaves in a certain way in a situation that, you know, maybe you sit in a certain spot in a room, or maybe you don't talk at certain times, or whatever the customs or culture dictates. If you adhere to that, you are in a sense pacing with that group or person because you're following the practices and protocols of what is expected. So that's an example of a pace. Other paces are paraphrases to what somebody says. So if you paraphrase objectively and non-judgmentally what somebody says, for example, I might say, so what I'm hearing is, or it sounds to me like you, and I paraphrase it non-judgmentally, that's an example of a pace that is building agreement on what that person has said, demonstrating respect for it. Another example of a pace is when I make a statement or a declaration that I know we all agree to, that it's not a reach. We all recognize this as a truth. For example, I might say, boy, we know the past few days have been really hot in New York City. That could be a pace. It's just a point of agreement. It could be, wow, I know we're all so frustrated with not being able to get together because of the pandemic. That would be a pace that I think we would, you know, all agree to. Anyway, so when you use pace, 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 lead, you look to create a number of paces. So it might be, you know, I'm hearing that you're really frustrated with not being able to go outside and go to Broadway with how things are, and I know that we're frustrated we can't go up to Columbia and be together. And I know that we're also feeling hemmed in because it's been so hot outside. So those would be paces, right? I have 3 paces, and that would, in other words, create what we would call like a yes set. A yes set is the other person is saying, yeah, yes, I get it. I agree. That's true. Yes. So you follow up the paces with a lead, and the lead is an open question. So the lead might be, what are some ways you think we could create a moment where we could all get together and feel some of the, you know, good feelings of socializing that we're missing so much. So a lead is an open question that lets the other person then talk about their interest, their ideas, and their priorities. And through pacing and leading is one of the great ways that we influence. We influence, in other words, by looking for points of agreement, points of collaboration, points of, yes, we're all in this together, and then leading with an open question that lets the other person talk about their interests, their priorities, etc. This is a really powerful way to influence because this allows you to not only build a relationship through agreement, but also begin to understand more about what the other person's interests are. And the more you understand where somebody's coming from, the likelier it is that you're going to be able to influence them in the future. Influencing comes from, you know, feelings of comfort and collaboration. We can always, you know, get compliance by bullying people, by bossing them around. We can get people to comply because they may comply out of fear or concern. But if we really want to influence people to move forward, then we do that best by collaboration. And that's collaboration through, again, agreement, and then understanding of what the other person's interests are, and then looking for further collaboration. Once you know what somebody's interests are, you can begin to collaborate on another point. But unless you know what their real interests are, you can't do that. Unless you can force them, again, through forcing compliance, but you can't gain true collaboration unless you know what somebody else's interests are. So pace, 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 lead is a really powerful tool for doing that. And it begins with, again, effective listening, good paraphrasing, recognition of points of agreement, following, paying attention to practices and customs and following those through, and then asking open-ended questions. So those are the things that I wanted to share as a recap of my paper, and then to talk about some other things as well. And I'm so happy to answer any questions that you might have, or listen to what comments or additions that you might have on this material.
Thank you, Professor Baney. Okay, so we already have a raised hand.
Great.
Elizabeth?
Hi, is that me, Elizabeth? I didn't raise my hand.
Coulter?
I think that's me, Elizabeth.
Okay, sorry, Elizabeth Coulter.
Hi, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Coulter, and I'm an incoming EMPA student this fall, so I hope to take your class. And this paper resonated with me for a number of reasons. But one thing that I've been working through, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about, is starting to build trust virtually, because I've noticed in some of my professional relationships that I had that are continuing in this virtual environment, continuing that trust and continuing to build relationships is a little easier than with folks that I'm now just meeting in a virtual environment and are expected to work. I'm expected to work with them the same way I work with those folks that I had previous relationships with. So I was wondering if you could expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I was just thinking about that this morning too, because I'm going to be starting a class in a few weeks, and that is an opportunity that I have, and certainly one I hope to leverage, and that is building relationships and building trust with people that I don't know, right? And people I haven't met before. And it is a big challenge. So a couple of things. One is that, you know, we demonstrate respect by setting ourselves up in the way that, you know, that I think most of us have been doing, and that is, you know, providing a virtual setup that says, I value this interaction, and I've taken the time to make sure that the way I'm coming to this moment represents interest, and you know, you can trust me for that. So that's one thing, and that's the, again, setup, lighting, and those types of things. The other that I'm going to say is that I want to encourage you to be intentional about the horseshoe nails of the things we've spoken about. So when we know one another in person, in real life, we can lean on a lot of environmental factors that do a lot of work for us. And those are little niceties that may happen as we're bumping into one another at the copy machine, or, you know, at the proverbial water cooler. And little ways that we build relationships through casual comments, nice, you know, nice things, picking up coffee, whatever it might be. Now we no longer have that advantage. So we need to be intentional about the things that do happen on the screen. And that means, again, demonstrating respect for the way you show up, demonstrating energy, coming to the moment with interpersonal energy. Private energy is typically lower than public energy. And when we in the past go to the office, we may not have had much of an awareness of how we build our personal energy on our way to the office. And when we get there, we're pretty energetic because we've, you know, been walking or been on the subway or been chatting with the, you know, as we buy our newspaper, whatever it might be. But when we just come and turn on our computer, that's all we do, that's the whole process, then we have a flat energy. So I'm going to say one of the things you can do also is just come with greater energy. And that might mean doing some jumping jacks ahead of time to build your energy. It may mean that right before you turn on your, you know, your video, you just like scrunch up your face and, you know, kind of move around a little bit to get your energy up. And it also means that you are a little bit, it may feel heavy-handed, but you are a little bit, you know, intentional with your nonverbals. And that means that you preview what you're going to talk about in a meeting. You maybe give some time for chatting. You leave the room open, maybe have it open early at the beginning for chat, maybe open at the end for a little bit of informal chatting. You may thoughtfully paraphrase what somebody has said or just comment on it, but we probably have to do this more intentionally than we would have in the past, because we don't have the advantage of the interpersonal contact that we used to have. Hope that we have it back. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Powell.
Yes, thank you. I hadn't raised my hand earlier, but I wanted to. I was looking for the button. So, hi, good to see you, Professor Baney.
Hi, nice to see you.
Thanks for taking the time. I was able to take her class in the fall and highly recommend, if you haven't yet, do it. So when talking about listening, I took scrupious notes. Again, I'll give reminders of how to do it, but why is it so hard? Like, what should we also not be doing that maybe is going on instead of us like focusing on these things that make listening, is, at least for me, like difficult, even though I know it's important and need these reminders all the time. And then if you'd humor me, I'm just curious as to like your perspective of how long, from a communication standpoint, remote life, like how sustainable is like true remote life? It's interesting to see big tech companies, you know, saying, yeah, fine forever, you be where you want to be. But then I also really enjoyed, I don't know if y'all saw Jerry Seinfeld's article in the New York Times yesterday. He was like, New York's not dead, because at the end of the day, people love the energy of being around other people, and just like that's irreplaceable no matter how good the technology is. So I would just be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. No, I haven't seen that article, but I'm going to look for it. Thank you. In terms of what we should not do, there are so many don'ts that I'll just go into some of them. Some of the don'ts are: don't check your phone while you're talking to somebody else. Don't look away. Don't allow your attention to be diverted in the zillions of ways it can be. Don't try to don't interrupt others. Don't finish their sentences. Don't pick a better word to describe something that they're trying to describe. In other words, don't compete with them. Don't try to one-up them to demonstrate what a great listener you are by saying something better than they said it. And I would also say that it's good to be comfortable with silence. A good listener is going to be comfortable with silence. We all express ourselves. We live at different paces, and some people, live at a faster pace than others. Often fast-paced people they dislike silences, and so they look to fill silence. And that means that for somebody who's a slower paced person, it doesn't give them the generous comfort of feeling like there is a chance for them to think and choose the right word for them. So in other words, what do? Is you try to get into the energetic pace of the other person. If they're fast paced, then it may be fine for you to match it. If they're slower paced, then you want to try to match that as well. So be comfortable with silence. And there are a lot of ineffective ways of paraphrasing, paraphrasing again is you're looking to objectively and non-judgmentally recap what the other person has said. And there are a lot of ways to do that wrong. And some of the ways to do that wrong are to mischaracterize it by criticizing it, maybe by false praise, by sending a solution, trying to solve someone's problem. Maybe they haven't asked you for a solution, but you want to be helpful and give advice. That is that can be really damaging. By, diverting to your own story, oh my God, that sounds terrible, but let me tell you what happened to me. That is very tempting, and it's not a great thing to do when you're doing this kind of listening. So I want to make a distinction here, because I don't mean to say that you can't have regular conversations. You absolutely can. But the kind of listening that I'm talking about is a special skill it's a special tool that you pull out of your tool belt at certain times. You don't always have to do it. It would be weird if you did. But it means that sometimes you want to say, oh, this is my opportunity to use the kind of active listening that I know about, because in this moment, I'm looking to gather information, diffuse tension, build my credibility, build understanding, build a relationship. Those are all great reasons to use the kind of listening I've talked about. The other comments I've made may be fine in other conversations. They all have their place. But I guess the question here is to have self-awareness to, when you make a comment, when you're listening, what is that comment doing? There's an article in the Times that, in fact, I think we talked about in class when you were in it, Elizabeth. And the article is about listening, and the little acronym that's used in the article is WAIT, which is wait, and WAIT stands for why am I talking? So it's a good question to ask yourself when you're listening and you make a comment. Ask yourself, why did I just make that comment? Was it to send a solution? Was it to make a joke? Was it to make myself feel better because I know more? Was it to make the other, person not worry? Why did I make that comment? In other words, what is the interpersonal gain for the comment that I made? And we begin to develop self-awareness by asking ourselves those things. The last thing I want to say, Elizabeth, is, managing others is really about managing yourself. And the more we know about what our reflexive patterns are, the more options we have. One of the great things I think about this platform, Zoom platform, is that we get to see ourselves as listeners. So in class, those of you who've had my class know that we often talk about, you may not know what your listening face is, right? You may not know what you bring to the moment as a listener. But the great thing about Zoom is that now you kind of do, because you have a chance to look at yourself and you can say to yourself, oh, would I want to talk to that person? Is that person making a face of interest? Is it a face of indifference? Is it a face of criticism? Is it a face of contempt? You can start to look at what you are bringing to the moment through your own nonverbals. Thank you.
Bill?
Well, there's a reason why Joann has won 6 awards. It's hard to add anything, but I have 2 comments and then 1 question. So my 2 comments are, I'm a talker and I always like to jump in, and I hope that over time I've learned to teach myself that successful communication has a lot of similarity to poker. And that is, if you want to win at poker, you don't want the other people to know what you know. You want them to communicate as much as they can about what they know, and that will increase your chances of being successful. So I think as much as you can, wait is a great, thing to keep in your head. It's hard because particularly at work, you want to be successful and you don't want somebody else to use your idea before you do. And then, they're the star and you're not. But in my experience, which is long, over a lot of years, you can be more persuasive even if someone says sort of what you were going to say by hearing what everybody else says first. And then you can compliment all of them and quote unquote build on what they said. And you could be the star and you don't offend anybody, you compliment, yada, yada, yada. So that's one observation. The second observation, which I often say in my class, for any of you who have been there, I apologize. I have said for the last 20 years, and I just was too stupid to recognize it before that, the 10 best things I've ever said in my life, or what I think were the 10 best things I would have said in my life, are things I didn't say, right? Because I was being a wise ass, or I was being provocative, or I was trying to be right and make other people wrong. And over time, doing that wrong so many times, I came to realize my point in talking was to try to get to a point, and being a wise ass or being aggressive or, calling attention to myself all defeated my purpose. So, it may make you feel better, but most of the time, if you wait and think, a lot of the things you would have said, in retrospect, you wish you didn't say. So hold back. Now to my question. Every great writer, famous writer on leadership, talks about communication among the top 4 things that great leaders have, whether it's Peter Drucker or Warren Bennis or James McGregor Burns, John Coulter. I could list to you all the great writers on leadership, and they all put communication way up there. But in general, most people who talk about great communicators in terms of leaders are talking about talking, not listening, right? They're all, I work for Mario Cuomo, who was often still is talked about as one of the great communicators in modern. He was a terrible listener. He really didn't care what anybody else thought. He wanted to say what he thought, and he said it well. So, Joann, could you either think of some people, even if they're famous for their speeches, who, in your estimation, were great listeners, or maybe people that we don't know who were leaders that were particularly good at communication in a more comprehensive sense?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And I completely agree that, you know, they say that a lot of great politicians have, you know, one of the great communication factors for a politician is charisma. But a charismatic person isn't necessarily a great leader in the comprehensive way that we're talking about. So I agree with that. I think, you know, Bill Clinton is an example of somebody who maybe was also a great speaker, but also is, so I am told, a great listener. No, I never met him. Maybe you did. I know many people who have worked with him and have met him and spoke about what a powerful listener he was. So he was able to maybe combine both of those skills, both communication skills, both sides of it. Bill Bratton, who I know you know, former police commissioner in New York City, was a great listener in my experience, my personal experience. And so was Ray Kelly, a police commissioner. Wouldn't necessarily, I think, be known for that, but in my personal experience, he was. So one of the great things that, of course, a listener does, to your point, is they gather information from others and take advantage of what they learned, as opposed to being center stage and spotlight all the time. And that is a, you know, it's a, maybe, I'm not going to say it's a rare talent, but it's a very special talent when somebody is able to do both. And to your earlier point about holding back and waiting, I couldn't agree more. It takes an enormous amount of self-management and self-control to do so, but it's a really great technique. And I know many people who do that to great effect. They let everyone else talk. It is a, you know, like you said, for playing poker, talk about having all the information. You know your stuff when you go into a meeting. You know your stuff. You live your stuff. But what advantage you has if you listen to everybody else's? Now you know all their cards and you know your own. So that is a very powerful position to be in. And then lastly, simply because you made the comment about how powerful it is to hold back, I think Warren Buffett is known for saying one of his success statements is you can always tell someone to go to hell tomorrow. It doesn't have to be today. And if you are able to, you know, restrain yourself, then you may learn something, and you may use that to your advantage to tell them to go to hell tomorrow.
A paraphrase of that, Tip O'Neill, who was a very famous politician in the US from Massachusetts, who was Speaker of the House when Ronald Reagan was president, and they actually got a lot done and got along together. He used to say all the time, which I adopted, don't get mad, don't get even, get ahead. And getting ahead mostly means don't make enemies. There's no plausible reason in your own interest to tell someone to go to hell. I mean, how does that benefit you other than, you know, get your angst out? It really doesn't benefit. At a minimum, you've solidified an enemy, or maybe you've even made an enemy of someone who really liked you, but maybe they misspoke, or, you know, maybe you viewed them as red and you're blue or whatever. So keeping your mouth shut is often a really great way to communicate in the long run.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Very good. We could go on and on, couldn't we? Thank you, Joann.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for talking so much.
No, I thank you.
We have some questions in the chat from Minerva. Professor Baney, do you cover emotional intelligence in leadership?
Well, in the class that I teach, the answer is yes. The idea with emotional intelligence is a lot of emotional intelligence skills are the ones that we've touched upon. And we talk about it in my class. We talk about self-awareness, begins from self-awareness. Where are you on the playing field of interpersonal communication? And then building off that with some of the key interpersonal skills that relate to emotional intelligence, listening, delivering feedback, asking powerful questions, influencing, etc. So if your question's about in the class, absolutely. And it is, again, part of what good communicators do, and that is they try to understand the perspective of the other person.
And then from Sophia, after COVID-19, there are many messages on social media platforms. Too much information is easily overlooked or misunderstood. How do you see the written communication at this remote communication time?
Can you say that last part again, Jeremy?
How do you see the written communication at this remote communication time?
Right. So, everything is, we are having to put into virtual ways, whether it's over, Zoom or virtual platforms like that, or in emails or text. We're having to cram everything that normally would have happened by bumping into somebody, bumping elbows and saying casual things in these, I'm going to say, through these technologies that capture everything, right? So when something is captured electronically, it never goes away. It never goes away. And that puts an uncomfortable, I'm going to say, premium on our being very careful in the way we communicate. Texts never go away. Emails never go away. This interaction is being recorded. It's never going away. So all of us, for better or worse, have to be especially cautious and careful about how we communicate with one another on these platforms. And I think it is unfortunate and maybe damaging. One of the ways we learn about ourselves as people is by trying things out. Like maybe we make a throwaway statement or a comment, or we react in some way. We see that somebody else likes what we've said, or maybe somebody dislikes what we've said, and we filter that information back and think to ourselves, oh, should I have said that? Did I really mean that? I see that hurt somebody and that's not my intention. Let me rethink my perspective. That's how we learn and grow as people. And we can do that comfortably if we feel like we have a safe space to be ourselves. When we communicate virtually and things are captured electronically, we no longer have that. And I honestly think that's unfortunate. For me, my belief is that it will restrict, it'll restrict our personal growth, the growth that comes through experimentation. That's my own belief.
Great, thank you. If you have any other questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand. I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. How do we communicate effectively, I know through the virtual situation that we're in, to keep, I think, in positions of supervision, how do we communicate effectively to make sure things get done on time? Because in the office, you see people acting, you see people doing what they're supposed to be doing, but I think there's a limit to that when we're in the virtual space. So how do we do that without coming off as micromanaging or obsessive?
Right. It's a really great question, Jeremy. I would say that a helpful thing to do, and a colleague of mine does this, is have daily or every other day check-ins. And if you establish those as conversational, comfortable check-ins, then it won't seem like you're looming over someone to micromanage them. And so one of the ways that, for example, coaching is done most effectively is when we coach a little bit every day. We're in touch with somebody, we say a little thing about what they did well or what they could do a little better, and we do it every day. Just like if you were the coach of a soccer team or a baseball team, you wouldn't wait till the end of a series of games to coach somebody. You would do it during the game, you would do it after, you do it all the time. And so coaching and managing is best done in little incremental, sometimes inconsequential, sometimes very consequential, but little ways, so that you normalize those conversations and interactions.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Bill?
I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk too much, but I think this is really important because most of you, if not all of you, are too young to remember this. But during the McCarthy era in the United States, after the Second World War, there was great fear about communism spreading to the United States. And some, again, I apologize for all these things because I'm saying things I shouldn't say, but a Trumpian type of character was Senator McCarthy, who saw it as advantageous to call into question and literally come to Congress and testify as to why they were communists and why they are in the movie business or in politics or in business, and to bring the wrath of all of society and even the FBI down on these people for what they thought or what they believed or what they might have said. And it was one of the worst eras in the history of the United States. He was eventually toppled. But many of you probably don't know that one of the main reasons why we have tenure in American universities is McCarthy went after professors for what they had said or what they had written. And in response, universities passed tenure, which said at a certain level of competence, you would be voted by your peers in the university tenure, and you could never lose your job, no matter what anybody did, whether it was the president of the United States or anybody. And the goal was so that at least professors would say what they thought, no matter what other people thought. And that was of value to society and particularly to students. It's a long way of saying, I really worry about what Joann just said. And that is, on Zoom, not only is it what you say available to the class, it's recorded. And actually members of the class could record it as well. And that former safe space where we could all have conversations is not there anymore. And that's problematic because people like me, for example, who are pretty outspoken about what I think and why, I'm constantly catching myself to say, should I really say that? You know, what if somebody wanted to use that against me? Maybe I should just not say it. And frankly, that's cheating my students and that's cheating our class, because then if it's provocative, we'd have a great discussion and, you know, we think about it. We'd all think about it. I think about it. When I say something provocative and I get pushback, I think about it. I've never taught the same class the same way, ever, because I learn from our discussions every time. I'm worried that I and my students will learn less going forward because of the space that we're in. Now that can be dealt with, right? We could deal with that by having the recording only available for a certain period of time, like a week, and then it's erased. We could all sign confidentiality pledges, which says, I hereby attest that what goes on in this class is between the members of this class, and that's it. But anyway, I raise it only because I think it's a very, very important issue, and we're gonna go into a semester which mostly is gonna be Zoom, and maybe even a year that's going to be mostly Zoom. And Zoom is probably going to be with us in some form forever. So I throw that, what do you think about that, Joann?
No, I agree. And it, you know, I'm doing a session for a group in a week or so. They want to record it and they'd like to distribute it within their organization. And I said, you know, I don't have a problem with that. I said, but you're going to need to check with all the participants, because they need to know that any question or comment they make will then be there for all time. And that may inhibit their participation. I expect it will inhibit their participation. And it's a filter, you know, the imagining what an audience we don't even know may think about our comments is a filter. It's a great burden. And it's a filter that is, you know, as we're learning, I think is probably not one that is helpful to expanding our thoughts and considering, you know, possibilities or options. So I agree with you, Bill. I think it is inhibiting, and I think there's an opportunity there for, you know, thinking of workarounds in educational environments.
Great. So we're at the 1 o'clock, well, 1:01 mark. And I think, are we good to wrap up, or do you want to add anything else? Any closing, Professor?
Well, I want to thank all of you for showing up, and it was a pleasure to see you again. Some of you I know, some of you I recognize are going to be in my class this coming semester. I've already seen the list, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you. And otherwise, I want to express my gratitude to Bill and to Jeremy for setting this up and for keeping SEPA together at times when it is really hard for us to, you know, be together in real life. So thank you.
Thank you, Joann. You were great as always.
Thank you.